El Paso County 911.
My son was supposed to be home at 6 o'clock, and it's almost 7. He's only 11.
Okay. What's his name?
Gannon.
Today's case is really heartbreaking and just messed up. We're talking about 11-year-old Gannon Stock. One minute, this sweet kid was playing video games, and the next, he was gone, just vanished. His whole family, the police, neighbors, everyone was frantically looking for him. But what makes this even more tragic? The last person to see him was his stepmom, and she was hiding a lot more than anyone could have imagined. Who was Gannon? How did things spiral into such a tragic story? Let's get into it, because this once, it's just a lot to take in. The background. He was the golden child of his parents, born on September 29, 2008, 3 months prematurely. No one thought he would survive. He barely weighed 1 pound and 6 ounces. The doctors told his parents, Landon Bullard and Eugene Albert Stauch, that his chances of survival were less than 10%. But somehow, against all odds, this baby made it, alive and healthy, without any lasting health complications. He grew up loving sports, playing outside, and of course, video games. He loved playing them a lot. Soon, Al and Landon had a little girl, Lena. They were like the perfect little family. While Landon took care of the kids, Al served in the National Guard. But behind closed doors, their family was falling apart. Because if there's one thing about military families, it's that not everyone can survive the long distance and constant deployments. Landon couldn't. She complained that she was the only one taking care of the kids while Al was away on duty. She felt like a married single mother, and things just weren't okay. By the time Gannon started school, the couple had separated and soon divorced. After the divorce, both kids spent most of their time with their mom, living with her, going to school, and participating in after-school activities. When Al was home, he would spend time with the kids. Their lives, though, were filled with disruption, until Al met someone new in 2014. That someone was Letitia Harden. They met as teammates on a co-ed baseball team in South Carolina. They had something in common. Both were parents. Letitia had recently gone through a divorce herself and had her teenage daughter Harley in her care. Al quickly felt like Letitia was the perfect match for him. Not only did she have a good personality, but she was also a mother and a special education teacher in the Horry County school system, someone who could support him in raising his kids. Not even a year had passed before they got married in an intimate ceremony in January of 2015. At first, nothing changed much with the kids. Al still visited them on weekends and spent most of his time deployed with the National Guard. But with Letitia now in his life, Al felt he had a new family and that she could help with the kids. So, he applied for an increase in custody, but it was denied. Not for long, though. Landon wasn't taking this lightly. She spent her days drinking excessively, jumping from one relationship to another, and ultimately putting her children's safety at risk. This gave Al the opportunity to get full custody of the kids, while Landon was left with just visitation rights. When this happened, Al was living with Letitia in Colorado Springs, more than 1,500 miles away from his ex-wife in South Carolina. Surprisingly, things went smoother than expected. The kids missed their mom, of course, but they also adjusted to living with their new stepsister, Harley. Gannon even developed a deeper interest in sports, and he and Al spent hours watching games together. Finally, their lives seemed perfect, stable, and consistent, but it wouldn't stay that way for long. Somewhere along the way, Letitia started falling out of love with Al. She despised his ex-wife, and more disturbingly, she didn't like Gannon at all. In fact, she would go as far as to hurt him. Not just hurt him, but take his life. That's right. This woman was so vile that instead of just separating from Al and moving on, she decided to destroy his family in a way they would never recover from: the murder. Al had been set to deploy with the National Guard from January 25th to the 28th, leaving Letitia alone with her 17-year-old daughter Harley, 11-year-old Gannon, and 8-year-old Lena. It wasn't an unusual case. Al would usually be deployed pretty frequently, leaving Letitia to manage things at home. But this time, his departure would turn deadly. On January 26th, Letitia had planned to take Gannon and Lena out for a hike. Harley was supposed to join too, but she got called into work last minute, so it was just the three of them. Everything was going fine at first, but then Gannon started saying his stomach was hurting. He didn't make it to the bathroom in time and ended up having an accident while they were still out walking. That was the end of the hike. Letitia rushed the kids back home so Gannon could rest. But even later that night, he wasn't getting any better, staying up sick most of the night. Letitia kept texting Al about how Gannon was doing, updating him on the situation. Just before midnight, Letitia sends a text to Al. She says Gannon isn't feeling well. He's been going up and down between the bathrooms all evening. At first it sounds like a normal, concerned message, but no. This is where the lies start. But what's weird is, right after midnight, Letitia hops online and starts searching things like, "My son burned the carpet? How do I fix it?" And then she's looking up whether a humidifier helps with smoke from a fire. Turns out, something had happened where part of the living room carpet got burned. She's literally searching, "Smoke from fire, will humidifier help?" Just before midnight, Letitia sends another text to Al, telling him that Gannon accidentally knocked over a candle, causing a small fire in the living room. She tells Al that she handled it, and even says that Gannon left a note, apologizing because he was scared he'd get in trouble if his dad found out. Her tone in those messages was almost too calm, like she's brushing it off as just a little accident. But the truth is that it was just the first part of her carefully curated plan, because there's even a video of the incident. And there, her tone is anything but calm. She sounds condescending, dismissive. Letitia can be heard saying they'll have to sell things to cover the cost of fixing the mess. And it's just bizarre because Gannon, in this conversation, says something like, "I'm just worried about my burns." But Letitia brushes it off, and then, just like that, she cuts him off and ends the conversation. Like, why is the money more important than an injured kid? Then, a little over an hour later, she starts Googling completely different stuff, like Colorado law for kids staying at home, and son is sick but I have to go to work. She then called Gannon's school early in the morning to let them know he wouldn't be there that day. By then, she'd already texted Al, telling him she was going to make up an excuse to skip work so she could stay with Gannon. And at 4:30 a.m., she texts her boss, this part is wild, claiming her stepfather had died in a car crash and she wasn't coming in. He had actually died years ago. On January 27th, 2020, at 10:12 a.m., surveillance footage catches Letitia and Gannon leaving their house in her red Nissan Frontier. They're headed to Petco, but later we find out Gannon's not fine at all. He's barely able to stand, looking sick and out of it. And why? Because Letitia had drugged him with a heavy dose of painkillers. They're out of the house for around 4 hours. For 4 hours were Letitia's phone completely silent. This was the period where Letitia started mentally preparing for what was about to go down. Then, around 2:20 p.m., they're back. Surveillance footage shows them walking into the house together. Gannon walks in first, totally unaware that he's never leaving that house alive again. Sometime between their return and when Letitia's daughter Harley comes home, Gannon is brutally attacked in the basement. There were multiple stab wounds, blunt force trauma to the head, and, if that wasn't enough, a gunshot to the jaw. Clearly, this wasn't some accident. This was calculated, premeditated, and if that doesn't make it personal enough, forensic evidence later shows that Gannon, he fought back. He tried to defend himself even though he was heavily drugged, but this woman still had no mercy on his poor little soul. Right after the murder, Letitia didn't waste any time. She started cleaning, scrubbing the carpet, wiping down the walls, even working on Gannon's mattress, trying to erase the blood. At 4:15 p.m., Letitia texts her daughter, Harley, asking her to grab some supplies: carpet cleaner, trash bags, baking soda. All the essentials you'd need to cover up a crime. No ounce of regret. But cleaning wasn't going to be enough. She needed a story, a reason for why Gannon suddenly vanished without a trace. As the night goes on, she begins piecing together her story. She tells Al, who was away on deployment, that Gannon went over to a friend's house, but hadn't come back. Her voice was completely calm, like nothing was wrong. But her story was full of holes. Later that night, when she finally reports Gannon missing, she doesn't even remember the name of this so-called friend, or where they supposedly lived. These details, or lack thereof, would become key evidence later on. So by 6:54 p.m., Leticia finally calls the police to report Gannon missing. It's been almost a full day, and she's just now reporting him missing. Okay, red flag number 1, from the investigation point of view, of course. The police get involved, but they're not even half caught up to what this woman was actually up to. For now, let's look at what she did. We'll take a look at how the investigators found out about her actions in the next section. So we get to the next morning, January 28th, early hours. By this point, Leticia knows she's got to act fast. She's fully aware of what needs to be done. She needs to get rid of Gannon's body. So at around 6:30 a.m., she leaves the house, just for about 10 minutes. In that tiny window of time, she most likely moves Gannon's body from the house to the trunk of her car. But she's not done. Somewhere during the day, she moves his body to this remote location north of Colorado Springs. She dumps his body here, but later that morning, at 9 a.m., she drives to the airport. You're probably thinking she's catching a flight to run away, right? No. She parks her car in short-term parking and rents a Kia from Avis. Yes, she rents a car to pick up her husband, Al, from the airport. Her excuse is she doesn't want miles on her cars. And Al, he believes her. He truly has no idea. And then she calls her daughter Harley to come pick her up at 10:30 p.m. Harley also has no idea what's been happening. So then, on January 29th, Leticia goes ahead and returns the rental car to Avis at 9 a.m. Now fast forward to February, Leticia has Gannon's remains, and she decides to drive, yes, drive, all the way to Florida with his body with her daughter Harley, who, once again, had no idea what was happening. And she rents a van for this trip as well. In a surveillance footage and receipts, it can be seen that Leticia had checked into a hotel near Pace, Florida, on February 4th, 2020. But it gets worse. While Harley was sleeping in the hotel room, completely unaware of what was happening, Leticia went out and disposed of Gannon's body. Her own daughter was right there, having no clue what her mother was doing. It's just unsettling on so many levels. All of this was happening while the investigation back in Colorado was still focused on finding a missing boy, a boy whose life had been snatched days ago. The investigation. Here's how the investigation went. Remember, it was January 27th, 2020, around 6:55 p.m., when Leticia Stoch calls 911. She's reporting that her 11-year-old stepson, Gannon, is missing. But when she makes the call, the operator tells her she should be contacting the non-emergency line for something like this. Leticia doesn't seem too fazed by it. She goes ahead and dials that number, and when she finally gets through, she tells the operator that Gannon had gone out to play with his friends but hadn't come back.
Paso County 911.
My son was supposed to be home at 6 o'clock, and it's almost 7. He's only 11.
Okay. What's his name?
Gannon.
When was he last seen?
Maybe around like 3:30, maybe.
Has this ever happened before?
No. So we went to the neighbor's house. My daughter just went to Stingray Park, and he's not there.
She says she called all of Gannon's friends' parents, but no one knows where he is. None of the neighbors saw him either, and that's weird because kids playing outside. Someone usually notices, right? 3 hours after that first call, 2 officers show up at the Stoke house on Mandan Drive. They do a quick check around the house. Nothing seems off. No sign of Gannon, no mess, no struggle. It's like he just vanished into thin air. When the officers finish their search, they sit down with Leticia to get more details. She starts off by saying she's Gannon's stepmom and that his dad is away on deployment with the National Guard. Gannon wasn't feeling well that morning, so she let him stay home from school. But by 3:15 p.m., she says he was feeling better, so she let him go out and play with his friends. Make it make sense? He was so sick that he couldn't attend school but got well in just a day. She says when he didn't come back home a few hours later, Leticia started to panic. She checked with neighbors, called around, and even sent her 17-year-old daughter to the park to look for him. And then, Leticia just goes ahead and changes her story. She says she doesn't really think Gannon's missing. No, because apparently she found his phone in his room, and apparently he'd been searching. Can my parents find my cell phone if it's off? He was 11. And then she says his Nintendo Switch, basically the thing he valued most, was gone too. She's convinced that Gannon had planned this. He took his Switch and just ran off. Regardless of whichever version of this was true, after Letitia's follow-up statement, police quickly launched a missing persons investigation. They set up a tip line, and by the next morning, Gannon's face was everywhere. News, social media, all over the neighborhood. People were out there searching, walking through fields, going door to door, hoping for some sign of him. Then, Letitia calls Al. She tells him Gannon is gone, and of course, he rushes back home from deployment. By now, the tips started pouring in. Some people thinking they saw Gannon, others pointing fingers at neighbors. You know how it goes. People's minds go to all kinds of places. But then, something strange happened. 2 emails arrived, claiming to be ransom notes. They demanded Bitcoin in exchange for Gannon's safe return. Bitcoin? It was 2020, and Bitcoin was all the hype. Investigators traced the emails, hoping this could lead to something. But the IP addresses led them overseas. The emails turned out to be fake. No other ransom demands came after that. So, that lead fizzled out. But here's where things take a turn. The investigators started looking closer at Letitia. Something just didn't sit right. Her story had discrepancies in it. Nothing major at first, but enough to make you stop and think. And then, there were the details she added. Little things that felt too specific. Like, have you ever noticed how sometimes when someone gives too much detail, it almost feels like they're trying to convince you of something? Instead of being devastated that her son was gone, she was insistent on proving her own innocence. And when someone does that, you just know they're guilty. Regardless, when Leticia was talking to an officer the day after Gannon went missing, she sounds oddly cheerful, almost too calm. And she keeps throwing in these unnecessary details, like she's building a story rather than just explaining what happened. It's uncomfortable, really. At this point, the police were trying to pin her down for a formal interview. They needed to get more from her, piece together the timeline of Gannon's last day. But Leticia wasn't cooperating. She would respond to a text here and there, but her answers lacked any sense of urgency. When the officers suggested dropping by Letitia's house, she immediately resisted, saying she didn't want them there. That same night, at 10:45 p.m., she sent a bizarre text message to one of the detectives. It was scattered, almost frantic, reading, "What do you want from me? I've got nothing. Someone from your team told me what you're all up to. I did nothing and now I'm being set up. I'm not sure why, but I'm hearing everything, even conversations inside the house. What do you want from me?" This was odd, to say the least. Everyone knows that the first 2 days after someone goes missing are the most critical. It's the time when the chances of finding them alive are highest. But Letitia didn't seem to grasp that urgency. And being the person who saw the kid the last time, why such sort of evasion if you're innocent? She wasn't pushing to help, wasn't offering more than what she'd already shared. Multiple stories. In less than 2 days, Letitia's version of events shifted multiple times. At first, she said Gannon had gone out with friends but hadn't come back on time. She even told the 911 dispatcher that she'd talked to the parents of these supposed friends and had gone to the neighbors to ask if they'd seen him. But when detectives started pressing for details, she couldn't point to a single house she'd visited. She had no names for the friends Gannon had allegedly been with. In fact, she hadn't spoken to anyone at all. On the night of Gannon's disappearance, Letitia had let officers into her house without hesitation. But by the following morning, everything changed. She was suddenly unwilling to let anyone inside. If they wanted to talk, she insisted they would have to meet her at the station, not at her home, the last place Gannon was seen. When officers did show up, they noticed something odd. Letitia's car, which had been parked in the garage the night before, was now gone. When asked about it, Letitia offered no explanation. Al, who had just returned from deployment, had no idea where it could be either. Her behavior wasn't what you'd expect from a worried stepmother. Instead, it felt like someone trying to cover her tracks. Despite all this, the police scheduled an interview with Letitia. They arranged for her to come to the station in downtown Colorado Springs on January 29th at 10 a.m., 2 days after Gannon had vanished. But when that time came, Letitia was nowhere to be found. When she finally sat down with them, she started talking about a fire in the basement. Yes, the one we talked about before. Now, she was saying. It happened the day before Gannon went missing and claimed that the next day, she noticed burns on his arms. Burns she apparently didn't see earlier. And what did she do? She said she left the house to get burn cream and some supplies to fix the carpet that got scorched in the fire. This was the first time she ever mentioned this fire. Like no one had heard about this before, and instead of jumping into any helpful details about Gannon, she spent the next 45 minutes rambling on about this fire, the carpet, and why Gannon stayed home from school. She talked about how she was worried about his burns and how she was going to fix things up. But then it got even stranger. She wasn't exactly in a hurry to help the investigation. Instead, she talked about her designer purse, what she felt like eating and drinking, and even bragged about how she had job offers from airlines to become a flight attendant. So, she was rambling, trying to distract the cops from the investigation. The stepmother's lies about being assaulted. We know she's guilty. The cops don't, but they're suspecting it now, little by little. Leticia told them another story, that since their neighborhood was still under construction, she walked over to a house that was being built, found a carpet guy, and asked him to come fix their carpet. And she gave him the code to their house so he could let himself in while she ran more errands. That much trust on a stranger when there are 3 minors residing in the house is on its own pretty suspicious, isn't it? Anyways, Leticia told the cops that when she was driving around, she spotted some construction workers. She pulled up to them and asked one of them to help with repairs which had happened because of the fire. After they agreed, she gave him their address and security codes. When she got home around 2:30 p.m., she did the usual, disarmed the security system, and for some reason, went straight to the basement. Now, according to her, there was a random guy in the basement called Eduardo, a Hispanic guy, just waiting there for her. She described Eduardo as a 30-year-old Hispanic man with brown eyes and brown hair. That's it, no other details. Leticia said he attacked her, held a gun to her head, and sexually assaulted her. Then, when her daughter Lena got home from school at 3:15, she said Eduardo just let her go upstairs to greet her. She greeted Lena and sent her outside to play. Like nothing happened, right? Because she wanted to keep her safe. But then, she went back down to the basement, where the guy allegedly assaulted her again. This time, for an hour. Leticia's story goes that she blacked out twice during this, supposedly from hitting her head. She also said she lied about what happened because she was afraid. Not afraid of the guy who attacked her, but afraid of her husband. She had clearly thought out a story. From what she said, Al would somehow be mad at her for being assaulted, and for Gannon being kidnapped. So, instead of telling the truth, she said she panicked and told Al that Gannon went out to play and never came back. Even this didn't make sense for the investigators, because if she really was that afraid, then why not just help the cops find the kid, instead of being so uncooperative? But Leticia was a classic narcissist. She had come prepared with lies, and said that when the man was done with her, he held a gun to Gannon's head and demanded a suitcase. She said she gave him a brown suitcase and a cardboard box, like she was just handing over luggage. Then, according to her, he tried to assault her again, and this time she hit her head and passed out once again. When investigators asked about the timeline, Leticia insisted it matched what she said about Gannon going out to play, even though none of it was making sense. Investigators weren't buying it. They questioned why Leticia didn't call 911 when she went upstairs to check on Lena. Why didn't she try to run away? Why didn't she immediately report what had happened? Why did it take hours to do so, and even after that, how in the world was she so calm when reporting what had happened? There were just too many red flags. And if she was scared of her husband, why did she decide to discuss this whole attack after 2 days? Leticia then told the cops she cleaned up the basement after the attack. She said she even fixed up Gannon's room and the utility room too. And apparently herself too, because as you can see in the interview, she looked to be perfectly fine. But this much cleaning? Why? Even the cops were starting to wonder that maybe it wasn't because of some random intruder. Still, if she was making that statement, they had to verify it regardless. So, they offered her a sexual assault exam, which would have helped confirm her story, but she refused it. That definitely didn't help her case. Leticia must have realized things weren't going her way, because toward the end of the interview, she said she wanted to leave. But detectives weren't letting her go. They took her phone saying they were getting a warrant for it, and that's when things got odd. A possible suspect panicking as soon as cops start asking for information. Suspicious? More like a half confirmation of the crime? Because why would you be afraid if you were innocent? Letitia started shoving tissues down her pants, claiming she'd peed herself. A detective escorted her to the bathroom, and suddenly, she started complaining about chest pain and shortness of breath. Almost instantly, an ambulance was called, and she was taken to the hospital. Detectives went with her, of course, but during the ride, Letitia just went silent. She wouldn't answer any questions from the paramedics. Uncooperative much? Wait till you hear that when they got to the hospital and the detectives weren't in sight, Letitia suddenly got a lot better. She improved so much that she signed herself out before any doctors could even check her. Then she made a quick phone call to a friend and took off, leaving the detectives sitting in the next room. By the point, a warrant had been signed for her DNA, but Letitia had already left the hospital. Now, she was digging her own grave. If the cops weren't sure that she had something to do with Gannon's disappearance, they did now. They were dead sure. The cops started suspecting Letitia. Under this suspicion, investigators got a bunch of search warrants for pretty much everything. The Stauch home, their cars, Letitia's phone, you name it. They even gained access to her Facebook, Apple, and Google accounts. Yeah, they went all out. They also pulled her phone records, home security logs, and the Ring doorbell footage. They weren't leaving anything to chance at this point. They even spoke to the neighbors, hoping someone would remember something, anything from the night Gannon disappeared. And luckily, while no one remembered anything, one of the neighbors pointed out that he happened to have a security camera pointing right at the front of the Stauch home. When I say this was a jackpot, it really was. When cops reviewed the footage, they found out this woman was so good at lying, she should be writing fictional stories or, well, maybe biographies of a criminal. Because in that entire footage, no Hispanic man, or any man, ever entered the house that day. In fact, the only people seen in the footage were Letitia, Gannon, Harley, and Lena. So, that whole story Letitia told was a lie. Remember how I mentioned that the cops had warrants for everything? Well, when they went through Letitia's phone records, they found out that during the time she claimed she was being assaulted, she was actually sending texts. Oh yeah, she was texting Al and Harley about buying a new set of headphones for her husband. That's one way to multitask. Oh, and the security sensors inside the house told an entirely new story too. The back door was opening and closing 10 times during this so-called assault. And there was a lot of movement in the basement. That basement, by the way, is where Letitia claimed this whole ordeal went down. But when officers first arrived to check on Gannon, Letitia looked completely fine. No injuries, no signs of trauma. It wasn't just something that was off. Everything was off about this entire scenario. The day after Gannon went missing, Al allowed them to search the house. Then, with a warrant, they came back for a more detailed search, zeroing in on Gannon's basement bedroom. And let me tell you, this is where things started to make sense. They sprayed Blue Star Regent everywhere, which is like luminol. Basically, it glows when it touches blood. And, well, the place lit up. Gannon's bedroom, the utility room, the hallway, the garage, everywhere. There was blood, and it wasn't just a little, it was a lot. Enough that if a person, especially a child, lost that much blood, they would be as good as dead. The worst of it was found in Gannon's room. Blood soaked through his mattress, seeped into the carpet, through the pad, and even stained the concrete beneath it. Over 50 blood spatters were found on the walls and ceiling. It looked like something violent had happened. Something horrible. Blood was even spread across electrical outlets and showed signs it had been wiped down. And of course, the cops remembered that Letitia herself had mentioned cleaning up. A forensic expert took one look at the blood spatter patterns and could tell that whatever had happened wasn't just an accident. It pointed to one or more violent events, maybe a gunshot, maybe blunt force trauma, maybe stabbing. And we know by now, it was all of the above, sadly. The blood trail eventually led them into the garage, right to the spot where Letitia's Volkswagen Tiguan had been parked. By the time they found the blood, though, the car was gone. And as predicted, Letitia wasn't talking, and no matter how much Al begged her for answers, she wouldn't budge. When they tested the blood, it was confirmed. Gannon's DNA. the reality was starting to hit hard. This wasn't just a missing person case anymore. It was possibly murder. It had been 3 days since Gannon had been reported missing. The focus of the case was now shifted, but still they had hopes. Maybe the 11-year-old was just injured and had been taken elsewhere, so the focus was now on Gannon as being in danger. As they searched the Stauch home again and again, each search revealed more unsettling evidence of foul play. The suspicions. The investigation was snowballing, and with each new piece of evidence, it became painfully clear that this story wasn't going to have a happy ending. But what made the cops the most suspicious was Letitia's phone usage. Because normally, Letitia was glued to her phone, and she was Gen Z level of time spender on her phone. In any given 4-day period, she'd spend over 10 hours just scrolling through Facebook and chatting on Messenger. But it was only on the day Gannon went missing that it was silent. That's not all. She had left her phone at home when she went out with Gannon. At around 10:37 a.m., so not long after they left the house, Gannon's phone sent a message to Harley, Letitia's daughter. It said, "Tisha left phone at home if you need her, text me." Why would she leave her phone behind, especially considering how attached she usually was to it? Just an hour later, Letitia shows up on CCTV at a Petco store in Colorado Springs. And it's not like this Petco is right around the corner. It's 22 miles from their house. But guess what? Gannon isn't in the footage. Where is he? The drive to the Petco would have taken around 30 minutes, but there's almost an hour of time missing from the timeline. What were they doing in that gap? And that's not even the strangest part. After leaving the store at 11:22 a.m., Letitia was next caught on CCTV 2 hours later. At the same Petco. Why did she go back? No clue. But something about this doesn't sit right. Meanwhile, around 12:06 p.m., Al sent his son a quick text. "Hey, buddy." A little over an hour later, Gannon replied with something strange. He asked, "Can I play Zelda at least?" Which, by the way, seems pretty casual for a kid who was supposedly grounded. Al's response was firm. Not today. And that was the last known communication anyone had with Gannon, allegedly Gannon. Just 20 minutes after that text exchange, someone used Gannon's phone to search, "Can my parents find my cell phone if it's off?" And this exact search was something Letitia later showed the cops when she told them Gannon had run away. I'm sure you can connect the dots yourself. Letitia's phone didn't show any activity until 2:45 p.m., about 25 minutes after she returned home. But in the meantime, the house's security system picked up movement all over, upstairs, downstairs, and especially in the basement. So what was happening during those 25 minutes? You know exactly what. When Lena got home from school around 3:15 p.m. and she walked in, Letitia told her Gannon was asleep in her bed, but she wasn't allowed to see him. Instead, she was told to go outside and play. So Lena grabbed her bike from the garage and rode around the driveway, just waiting for her sister Harley to come home from work an hour later. At 3:55 p.m., Al sent another "Hey buddy" text to Gannon's phone, but this time, it wasn't opened until 7:40 p.m., hours later. But as we all know, it most likely wasn't Gannon who opened that text. At 4:40 p.m., Harley came home from work, picked up Lena, and the two of them left the house. Then, 10 minutes later, Letitia texted Harley, asking her to pick up some carpet cleaner, trash bags, and baking soda. Just, regular household items. Except, they're also the items one would use to a crime scene. Harley did what she was told and brought the stuff home later that night. Investigators later found the receipt for those items in Letitia's car. The phone records and CCTV footage give us a pretty clear timeline of what was happening that day, the father being a suspect. The cops knew it was in that house Gannon's life was taken from him, but they couldn't just rule out Letitia as the suspect without considering other options. Could it have been Al? But when Al was initially considered a person of interest in Gannon's disappearance, he had an alibi. He spent the night of January 25th in Denver, preparing for an early morning flight to Texas the next day for his National Guard deployment. After Texas, he traveled to Oklahoma, and by the morning of the 28th, he was on a plane back to Colorado, completely unaware of the nightmare he was about to walk into. Al's suspicion on Letitia. When Al landed, he immediately knew something wasn't right. First off, Letitia wasn't in the usual family cars. Instead of picking him up in their Nissan or Volkswagen, she showed up in a rented Kia. Naturally, Al was like, "Why are we driving a rental?" Letitia's explanation? She didn't want to put extra miles on her leased vehicle. Interesting, especially considering the fact that she'd only put 71 miles on the Kia during the rental period. Something doesn't add up for Al. When Al pressed her about where her car was, she refused to tell him. All she said was that it was parked near French elementary school, close to their home. The following morning, Letitia returned the Kia. When investigators later examined it, they found blood in the trunk, but it wasn't a match for Gannon. After arriving home, Al immediately joined the frantic search for Gannon. He was in a complete state of panic. His son was missing, and he had no idea what had happened. Thankfully, the community had already rallied together to search for Gannon. Churches, schools, families, everyone was out there looking. Gannon's mom, Landon, flew in and joined the search too. More than 300 people were out there, looking through roads, parks, and mountains, hoping to find any trace of Gannon. But despite the overwhelming community effort, there was one person noticeably absent from the search: Letitia. She would disappear into her room or drive off in her car without offering any explanation. It's hard not to feel suspicious, especially when everyone else was so desperate to find Gannon. So, by January 29th, Letitia walks into the police station, probably thinking she's got everything under control. But what she doesn't realize is that the investigators have already been digging through her recent activities. Everything we just discussed. So, while Letitia is sitting there talking about this guy named Eduardo and making some pretty wild claims about being assaulted, the investigators are just sitting there, nodding along. But they're just waiting to catch her slip-up. Evidence against the stepmother. And by the way, she showed up for the interview in her Volkswagen Tiguan. Yep, the same car that nobody had seen since Gannon disappeared. As soon as she steps out of the car, they seize it for a forensic check. And, oh, surprise, it's freshly washed. And by freshly, I mean the detectives even pull up car wash footage showing her Tiguan going through around 11:30 a.m., just before she decided to casually walk into the police station. Then the forensic team gets to work on her car and finds possible blood traces in a few spots: the rear bumper, step plate, and seats, front and back. Even near the glove box. Not looking good for her at this point. And then there's the GPS data. Turns out, the night before the interview, her car was driving around between the airport and this area north of Palmer Lake, about 47 miles away from the house. The GPS was spotty, but it gave them a decent starting point for a search. So the detectives do organize this huge search effort out there, hoping they might find something, anything, that could break this case open. And while all of that is going down, the media is all over the Stauch home back in Colorado Springs, turning what had started as a quiet investigation into a full-on media frenzy. On January 30th, while investigators are busy digging through all the CCTV footage, phone data, and GPS records to figure out if Letitia's story from the day before holds any truth, Gannon's parents, Al and Landon, hold a press conference, pleading for their son's safe return. Landon's in tears, visibly devastated as she speaks to the public. Al's right there beside her, as devastated as her.
It's been awful. It's been more than a roller coaster ride. It's been more than emotional mess. I don't even have answers for my feelings other than I'm afraid. I'm afraid that I will never hear his voice, that I'll never hear him run and say, "Mommy," that I'll never hear those corny jokes that he always tells every single day. He has to tell me a joke. He looks forward to telling me something silly. And I'm afraid that I may never see that again or hear it. I don't want to believe that, because that means that I'm giving up hope, and I'm not giving up hope because my son is full of hope. So I'm urging anyone that has any leads, credible leads, if you're too afraid because you know something, a kid just doesn't disappear and no one sees him. It's not how this works. So if you have anything that's credible, if you're afraid, don't worry about it. Imagine my son, how afraid he is. Imagine how afraid Gannon is. So please call, please write. If you need to have someone else to do it for you, please do. Because my son deserves to be here. He deserves to be here. Please call the El Paso Sheriff's County and let them know. And I thank you guys, the community, for what you've done. Because this is Gannon. This is who he is. And I thank you guys so much.
When Gannon was born, he weighed only 1 pound and 6 ounces, and even today he's still our miracle child. He still is, and he's such a happy child, and he just brings life to every party. His smile, even today, is keeping us going. His infectious smile brings me joy every time I think about it. The past 8 days have been, as Landon said, a roller coaster of emotions. Sometimes we jump in for joy because we get an information that we might think is a break in the case, and then the next minute we get we see something or get information that just breaks our heart into a million pieces again.
You could see the pain on their faces. It was heartbreaking. And that show of unity? It didn't go unnoticed by Letitia. The very next day, Leticia decides to call her own press conference. But instead of standing up for Gannon, it's like she had a whole different agenda. She shows up outside her home, and for 10 minutes, she stands on the grass, dark sunglasses on, face hidden, back to the cameras, talking, but not really saying much about Gannon.
You are?
I am Tisha Stout, which is Gannon's stepmother.
You've been a part of the investigation since the very first time. You were the last person to see him. Is that right?
Correct.
What did you see when you last saw him?
Well, I'm not allowed to talk about anything with the case. I would more so be willing to talk about how the community needs to have faith and continue to work together and not make these false accusations, like the things that have been said that I've disappeared from the community. I haven't been there to help, but there's lots of reasons behind that.
Reasons like death threats, right?
Right. Death threats are one of them. My family's getting lots of death threats. We counted over 20-some death threats already. 2, my husband's ex-wife is living in our home, and of course I'm not coming home to do these things and to help with the family when I was kind of like told I couldn't. And then many other things that happened with the El Paso County Police Department, and in doing the investigation, I was told I wasn't complying. And can I elaborate on that?
Please do.
Yes. So I asked for an attorney during the interview, and I was denied that by them. I was held because they were blocking the door, and I was told I couldn't leave, and that if I would have touched them, they would have probably, said I still wasn't complying, or said I was, trying to run away or something. But during the interview, I asked several times, could I stop the interview? Could I get an attorney? Could I stop the interview? Could I get an attorney? I was denied. I was told I couldn't get nothing to drink. I couldn't go to the bathroom. I mean, it was continuously that my constitutional rights were violated.
The way that people are reacting online to rumors about you with the search.
Oh yes, wow. The rumors have gotten so bad. I pretty much have been told at least 10 different ways that these people have these conspiracy theories. I guess they watch a lot of law shows and maybe they have all these theories on how Gannon is dead. And that's what they're saying. So I'm like, why are you saying Gannon is dead? He is not dead. We are going to find Gannon. And that's the main goal that we all have. My family has. Just because you haven't seen us, we have that same goal. We've been out searching. My aunt has been out searching. My family has been out searching. We all have been doing that together so that we can protect each other.
How does it feel when not only you have a lost child who you are in care of, but then people blaming you for that child not being there?
I'm just ready for Gannon to come home. Most importantly, for him to see his family. But second, I am going to be so ecstatic when I'm able to say to people that I hope they have a really sincere apology for all these theories that have came out online, for all the things they said that I have done or people have done. And I just want everyone to know that we're going to find Gannon. And I love him so much. I've helped taking care of him for so long. He's always helpful, and he was always so helpful with the dogs around the house, and we have 2 little cute dogs, and he was always like a person I could say, Gannon, can you go do this? And he would do it right away. Sometimes with kids, we have to remind them and things like that, and that's okay, but he was so sweet and able to help anyone. He could notice when you're sick and say, are you okay? And such a kind heart.
The whole thing starts with her introducing herself. But then, when reporters try to ask about her stepson's disappearance, Letitia dodges every question. It's almost like she doesn't want to talk about him at all. And the tone, totally off. She's upbeat, enthusiastic even. Almost like this is some casual chat and not a press conference about her missing stepson. Remember how Landon was crying and Al was emotionally drained? Leticia's the complete opposite. She's just standing there, acting like nothing's wrong. And when the questions do circle back to Gannon, she only addresses the rumors swirling around that she might have had something to do with it. Like, really? That's your priority? Just hours after Leticia's roadside interview, as she's still dodging questions, forensic technicians make a discovery. Blood in Gannon's bedroom belonged to him. That was enough for authorities to escalate his case from a missing person to endangered, pulling in the FBI to help with the investigation. By that time, the sheriff's department had already received 72 tips, and bloodhounds were combing through rural areas east of Colorado Springs, desperately trying to find any sign of the boy. And Leticia, she's back to her old ways. The very next day, January 31st, she rents a Nissan Altima, probably trying to stay one step ahead, since her Tiguan was still under custody. This time, she has a convenient excuse at least. Public accusations. A few days later, CCTV footage from the afternoon Gannon disappeared leaks to the media. This footage, handed over by a neighbor, shows Leticia coming home, but there's no clear sign that Gannon ever came back with her. And the public catches on. Accusations spread across social media, with people pointing fingers, claiming Leticia had murdered Gannon while they were out that day. By now, Leticia is spending hours obsessively scrolling through social media, reading every update, every comment, every theory. It's a lot, and it seems like she finally cracks under the pressure. That leaked footage, combined with strangers, harsh comments on Facebook, and another emotional appeal from Gannon's parents for his safe return, seems to push her over the edge. This time, Leticia's ready to defend herself. She takes to Facebook and writes this long, detailed post, finally addressing everything. In short, it's Leticia basically snapping and going off on Facebook saying she's done with the lies and threats. Y'all are idiots. She claims the neighbor sold the CCTV video for money and that there's another video no one's seen yet. Then she totally drags Gannon's mom, saying she never cared about him, did drugs, and put the kids in dangerous situations. She even says Gannon found his mom doing drugs on her iPad, and Albert had to rescue the kids from all this chaos, flying them back from Alaska and all that. And then she's like, why are you raising money for someone who didn't care? Raise money for a reward instead. She's super defensive, saying people don't know the real story and need to stop supporting Gannon's mom. It's all just a mess. In that super long post, and she mentioned Gannon just like 2 times. And what does that tell you? A guilty person trying to prove themselves innocent. Anyways, and that's not where she stops. This girl is getting real defensive. Leticia posts this whole explanation online, trying to prove herself innocent. She says the blood in the garage? Yeah, that's because Gannon cut his foot on some of Al's woodworking tools. And it wasn't even a big deal. She just bandaged him up while he sat on the edge of her car in the garage. But, by the way, she had never parked her car in that spot before. Like, okay, Leticia, sure. Then she says Gannon went in and out of the house, using the back door a bunch of times, because he wanted to make sure the gate was latched. Something about him being proud of taking care of the house while his dad was away. While he was injured from an axe. Make that make sense? Anyways, all of this is her attempt to explain why there's blood in the garage, blood in her car, and why the back door sensors went off 10 times that night. And she's just laying it all out there in case it comes up. Which she knows it will, because remember, she's been following the updates of the case online. But the best part about all of this is that the public didn't even know about the blood in the garage, or the sensors going off. She was doing preemptive damage control. She also threw in the detail that cops have a selfie of her and Gannon in the truck, supposedly showing him alive and well. And now, there's even a description of the friend she says he was with when he disappeared. But remember, how Leticia also told investigators that Gannon had been abducted by this guy who attacked her in the basement. So, to the police, it's a kidnapping, but to everyone else, she's like, oh, he ran away, or maybe he was taken while he was out playing. You see the pattern here? And her stories just keep piling up. First, it's that Gannon ran off with his friends. Then, she claims this guy, Eduardo, assaulted her and kidnapped Gannon. But later, it's not Eduardo. It's this wanted felon named Quincy Brown. And apparently Quincy not only carjacked her, but also assaulted her and, yeah, did unspeakable things to Gannon, which is how she explains the blood in his bedroom. It's like she's making stories out of thin air at this point. Then, on Valentine's Day, because of course it's Valentine's Day, Letitia tells yet another story. She says that back on January 27th, she and Gannon were on Highway 105 near Palmer Lake. Gannon was on his bike, but apparently he fell off and hit his head. And then, wait for it, Quincy Brown abducted them both. Oh, and she knows it was Quincy because, conveniently, his ID card fell out of his pocket. Yeah, sure. Now, the FBI had already started recording her calls with Al, and during one of these calls, Letitia says Quincy was still in the house when the cops arrived. She says she tried to signal to the officers that she needed help, but surprise, surprise, there's body cam footage that totally contradicts her story. There's no Quincy Brown anywhere in sight. Anytime Al pressed her for answers, she'd flip out and accuse him of not being supportive. Eventually, Al just had enough. He was pretty sure she was involved in Gannon's disappearance. And the timing of her latest story was just so convenient because it came just when the media started covering the searches near Palmer Lake, the exact area that Letitia's GPS had pointed to. She's clearly scrambling, trying to explain why she was in that area, but Al's convinced she had something to do with it. For weeks, investigators had been recording everything, his phone calls, texts, you name it, the breakthrough. Then, on February 15th, just one day after Letitia spins yet another tale to Al, searchers find something. It's a piece of particle board on Highway 105. It looks like it has blood on it, so the FBI sends it off to the crime lab. Tests show that the blood is human, and by the next day, they confirm it's Gannon's. Even after a thorough search, nothing else is found. The area was covered in snow, so investigators think maybe the particle board was used like a makeshift shovel to get rid of Gannon's body. As small as that piece of wood was, its discovery was massive, as this was a solid, undeniable clue that Gannon wasn't missing. He had been murdered. And on February 28, 2020, the authorities finally issued an arrest warrant for Letitia Stauch. And we know one thing by now. Letitia Stauch isn't one to give up so soon. She was no longer in Colorado Springs. She had taken off to South Carolina, almost 2,000 miles away. 2 days later, on March 2nd, 2020, more than a month after Gannon disappeared, police finally caught up with her. They arrested her and charged her with child abuse resulting in death, tampering with a body, tampering with evidence, and first-degree murder of a child under 12. They didn't even have Gannon's body at this point, but the evidence they found? It was enough to point right at her for this horrible crime. So Letitia gets arrested in South Carolina, but the charges are coming from Colorado. And during her interview with FBI agent John Grusing, she was apparently really shocked when they told her she was being arrested for Gannon's murder. Once again, she tried to pull off this story about needing protection, dodging every question. Then out of nowhere, she goes into this whole thing about someone named Angel. Yes, Angel, who apparently kidnapped Gannon during a trip to Petco. She even claimed Angel's nephew was buddies with Gannon. And the cops knew by now she was going to change her story as the case progressed. So she was asked why did no one see Angel on the Petco surveillance video. She got stuck. Letitia kept trying to see the footage to figure out where she could place her story, and finally was like, oh, it happened in that blind spot over there. Anyone could tell this was going nowhere, even after an hour and a half of this. At the end, she let herself be charged with his murder. 2 days later, she was on her way back to Colorado to face the consequences of her actions. But for Gannon's family, his dad Al, his mom Landon, this was no comfort. They had no idea what had actually happened to their son, and Letitia wasn't giving up any answers. Gannon's parents didn't beg for him to come home anymore. Instead, they just wanted information. They wanted to give their little boy a proper burial, something that no parent should ever have to ask for. On March 2nd, 2020, Landon Hyatt, Gannon's mother, was told she'd never see her son alive again. Legal proceedings. Just a week after her arrest, Letitia was in front of a Colorado judge, formally charged with first-degree murder. But of course, Letitia had to make everything worse. While being extradited, she tried to escape. She slipped her cuffs, attacked a female deputy with a can of Monster Energy drink, and tried to grab her gun. But she obviously failed. That same afternoon, Al Stauch filed for divorce. At that point, the only thing the family could hope for was for Letitia to be found guilty of Gannon's murder. But then, just 6 days later, the case took a definitive turn. The final discovery. On March 16, 2020, around 9 in the morning, a Florida Department of Transportation crew made a discovery that would change everything. They were checking out a bridge near Pace, Florida, when they found this old brown suitcase. You know better than me where this is headed. Inside that suitcase were human remains. The crew immediately called the police, and the area was sealed off. The suitcase had been poorly hidden behind some bushes under the bridge, like the person who left it didn't care much about hiding it. They probably thought the river would take it away. Out of sight, out of mind. To no one's surprise, that suitcase contained the remains of 11-year-old Gannon Stauch. He had been found over 1,400 miles away from home, nearly 2 months after he went missing. His body was so decomposed that some of his bones were showing through his skin. Gannon had died in the clothes he was wearing the day Letitia killed him. With the discovery of his body, more charges were added to Letitia's list. The authorities revealed that Gannon had been murdered in the most brutal way imaginable. 18 sharp force injuries, 4 blunt force injuries, and a bullet wound. He had been drugged with hydrocodone, likely to make him easier to control during the attack. It was absolutely horrifying. The trial and sentencing. And yet, even after all this, Letitia wasn't done. She tried to escape from jail in June 2020. She pulled all kinds of stunts to delay the trial, even trying to fire her defense team and represent herself. It didn't matter, though. In the end, justice would catch up to her. She had done something unspeakable, and no amount of lies or escapes would change that. By the time she was arrested, Letitia Stauch had already undergone 2 competency tests, both performed by state-hired psychologists. Each time the results were the same. She was found competent to stand trial. But of course, Letitia wasn't going to make this any easier. She changed her plea to not guilty by reason of insanity, claiming her childhood trauma led her to develop dissociative identity disorder. Her defense was that an alter ego named Maria, who she claimed would emerge in dangerous situations to protect her and the people close to her. The court wasn't convinced right away, though. Judge Gregory Werner ordered another sanity test, this time at the state hospital. The result was, as you would expect, that they determined she was, in fact, sane at the time of Gannon's murder. Still, her defense team wasn't ready to let that go. They brought in their own expert, Dr. Dorothy Lewis, who conveniently found the opposite. Letitia was insane during Gannon's murder, according to her. 3 years had dragged by, and Judge Werner decided enough was enough. It was time for this case to go to trial. He set the date for March 20th, 2023. Jury selection began, and the trial officially started off on April 3rd, 2023, at the 4th Judicial District Court. During the trial, it was slowly revealed how this woman was way crazier than what everyone else was imagining. Kevin Clark, a former intelligence analyst with the Colorado Springs Police Department, was the first witness called by the prosecution. Now serving as the acting director of crime strategies and intelligence, Clark pointed out that Letitia was a frequent phone user. Yet strangely, on the day Gannon vanished, her phone went silent from late morning to early afternoon, exactly when she and Gannon had gone to Petco and later returned home. That silence stretched for hours. Clark testified that they found a third phone of Letitia's, this one seized in South Carolina. Inside, investigators discovered a note dated February 19th titled, "In the case of a missing child, Gannon Stauch." The note went on to ask questions like, did you accidentally hurt him in a physical way? And did you murder your stepson? It was clear that Letitia had been thinking about how to cover her tracks. It didn't stop there. Clark also revealed Letitia's web history from February 20th. You want to know what she searched? Fake polygraph test. Seriously. She even visited a site that sold fake polygraph tests and went as far as to visit the payment screen. And if that wasn't enough, she then Googled, "Can you get away with a fake lie detector test?" No, Letitia, you cannot. Then, on the evening of January 28th, Letitia's iPhone went on airplane mode just after 7 p.m., and around 9 p.m., data from her vehicle showed she was at Palmer Lake, the same area where they later found a blood-stained board. Letitia tried to claim she was looking for Gannon during that time, but her phone data painted a very different picture. Clark gave the jury a detailed timeline of the days before and after Gannon's disappearance. The most shocking part of the trial came when Clark testified that Letitia had never left the house to search for Gannon, even though she had claimed she did. In fact, on the morning of January 28th, Letitia drove to the airport to pick up Al, leaving Gannon's body in the back of her T-gun. Later, she asked her daughter Harley to move the car into the garage, and Clark testified that there was blood on the wooden boards the car would have been parked over. As the trial continued, the prosecution brought in character witnesses to testify against Letitia. Her ex-husband, Al Stauch, testified that he believed Letitia was fully sane when she killed his son, expressing regret for ever bringing her into his family's life. Harley, Letitia's daughter, took the stand too, admitting that only recently had she realized how manipulated she had been by her mother. Letitia's half-brother, Dakota Lowry, testified that he saw her load a brown suitcase into her car, and something about the situation felt terribly off. There was also way too much evidence that Letitia had meticulously planned everything. Her search history, her travel records, it all pointed to someone who knew exactly what they were doing. Yet her defense clung to the narrative of her alter ego, Maria, trying to argue that she was insane when she committed the murder. Dr. Lewis, their expert witness, testified that Letitia had suffered a psychotic break, slipping into the Maria persona during the murder. The jury wasn't buying it, though. After just 8 hours of deliberation, they returned with a verdict on May 8, 2023. Letitia Stauch was found guilty of all charges and was determined to have been sane at the time of Gannon's murder. She was sentenced to life without the possibility of parole. Gannon's family, though devastated, finally had some closure. But they will always live with the horror that the very person they had trusted to care for Gannon was the one who took his life in the most brutal way imaginable. They have to spend forever wondering, what if? What if we had done that so our baby wouldn't have suffered this much? What if? I just can't wrap my head around how someone could do this, especially to a child. It's heartbreaking.